Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Abucus Stacey's Institute. We continue our Geopolitical Turnings Conference. It's been a long day, but a very rewarding day. And we have a very patient and erudite David Wemhoff here to speak about the geopolitics and the four pillars of the United Nations. So, David, welcome. And please tell us a bit about yourself. And you have the floor, sir, for as long as you need.
Well, thank you very much, John. You're very kind. Thank you for asking me to come and talk today. I am an attorney. I went to undergraduate University of Notre Dame, studied government, and then obtained a law degree, an advanced law degree in LLM in international law, and I've been practicing for about 35 years now. What I would like to, and I have the website, the American Proposition website, that I write on, blog on from time to time, and talk about issues, particularly America's role in the world. And America's role in the world has been very notable and very positive, and it's something that a lot of people, I think, over time have forgotten for a lot of reasons. Part of that is by design, because there's a very strong, very powerful, very evil Russian disinformation program that is going on and has been going on since at least 1958 to create division, to change ideas, to change perceptions of people in the West. And of course, that serves Russian geopolitical goals, which are to break up the alliances, as in NATO, to cause division and break up the United States, because Russia wants to be an empire. And Russia wants to have territory and grab resources and kill people and deny rights and do a lot of bad stuff. And now they're going to hide it in a lot of fancy talk and mystical musings, and they're going to critique the liberal order and say how horrible it is. And some people go along with that. But you have to understand, too, that this is all part of hybrid warfare or information warfare or disinformation coming out of the Russians. And it's very effective. Anatoly Golitsyn wrote a book about it, 1984, called New Lies for Old. And then, of course, The Perestroika Deception, 1995. Recommended reading, sets forth the Russian geopolitical goals. And the geopolitical goals of Putin and the Russians, it's not for world peace. It's for war and concentration of wealth. It's about helping the tyrants crush people and basically rule with impunity. They're going to give you religion, and they're going to give you ethnicity, and they're going to give you some mystical explanation of your being. But what they're doing is they're crushing you little by little. And there was a number of articles that have come out about this, how they siphon wealth away from people and destroy people. And this has actually been the fight through history. The fight through history has been about tyranny versus freedom. And tyranny has always been about people who love money. And freedom has always been about people who want to more fully serve God and do the right thing. And this has been the conflict all throughout history. And we saw it in our American Revolution. It became very clear in our revolution. We saw there that we rebelled against a landed estate in England, which wanted to control everything. There were about 10,000 of them. And they wanted to control everything. They did it through the king. They did it through the parliament. We saw that, and we were being crushed. And so we stood up to it. And in the course of doing that, a number of great ideas that have entered upon the international scene arrived. One is individual rights, which became human rights for the development of the person. And then the other one, of course, was the self-determination of peoples, a very important idea, which has gained a lot of traction in the last 150 years. And it's helped to provide a lot of peace. And it has gone into this idea of sovereign countries, which are separate and equal from other countries. So when countries like Russia and Putin, and I guess even now Trump, I mean, he's talking about, taking countries, which is ridiculous. But when you talk about taking other countries and getting spheres of influence, you're talking about devolution. You're talking about going back to savagery and barbarism, where you conquer, you take stuff over, you grab the resources. The world rejected this in 1945. It rejected it because of the leadership of America, and because America reached back into human history, into Christian history, and got this idea of community of nations. and gave it a juridical being, a juridical existence. Europe had forgotten that. All the crowned heads of Europe had forgotten it. Everybody had forgotten it. But America said, no, we have to have this to have peace in the world because of all the blood that's been shed over the course of 30 years. So what I'm talking about is I'm talking about right order in the world. I'm talking about the United Nations, which is a juridical expression of the community of nations, which is a long-held Christian and human belief that we're not just a number of 193 independent, anarchic little countries running around fighting each other, but we're actually a community. And this community is the earth, and we got 193 members of this community, and we have to get along and help each other. Okay, so the United Nations came about, and it's an important step to establishing right order. And there's 4 pillars: peace, development, human rights, and rule of law. And I'm looking at my script here as I walk along, as I read along here. And what all these serve is the best interest of the person, okay? They check the power of tyrants. They make the person someone who is important, who is to be cared for, who is to be developed, you know, who lives with the dignity that they are endowed with by their creator, by God, okay? And so what this is trying to be wiped away by the tyrants of the world. That's Putin in Russia, because his think tank is Dugin. That's his great mind, they say. And Dugin recently wrote a piece in February, earlier in February, in which he said, you know, we don't want internationalism. We're all great powers. It means we all get to fight each other and kill a lot of people and ruin a lot of lives because we want power. And that's really what Putin is about. And of course, Trump is mimicking that because I believe that Trump is a Russian asset. But that is a completely different discussion. And I don't want to go into that, but he's clearly serving Russian geopolitical goals. So let me start my talk here with it's somewhat long. I don't know how long it's going to go. I'll keep it short. But let me start this talk with a personal experience. And I was in Kansas City, Missouri, a few months back. I visited the National World War I Museum and Memorial. It's a pretty impressive structure. You can look out over the plains of Kansas. You can look across the Kansas River. Outside the museum, there are a number of inspiring phrases carved in stone and bronze. There's a dedication plaque, which solemnly announces the dignitaries that were there to present, to open the museum. They were all the great generals of the Great War. So when you walk into the museum, you walk over a glass bridge. It's the Paul Sunderland Glass Bridge. You look down, it's a field. There's 9,000 poppies. Each poppy represents 1,000 dead soldiers. 9 million soldiers died in that war, roughly 2 times that wounded. So you have 27 million wounded. You had 10 million civilians die in that war, roughly 20 million more wounded. So you had a total of about 57 million casualties, okay, in the space of about 4 years in that war, okay? So what were they fighting for? What were the kings and the queens and the emperors of Europe fighting for? They were fighting for territory and glory and power. And they used their tyrannical powers to slaughter their own people and the people of their neighbors in the bloody and muddy trenches of that war. Okay? You're talking about 40,000 casualties a day during that war. These were Christians, and they related even, all related. Okay? And they just killed each other. So religion wasn't enough. Nationalism wasn't enough. And this is what Putin uses. He uses nationalism, and he attacks people with it. And that is why he has always been able to keep power in Russia, because he pits people against each other. And so this is what you had with World War I. So America comes into World War I. America fights for peace. America comes up with a plan to say, we need to have peace. And the peace plan America came about with was really from the heart of the law of nations, from the whole Catholic idea of the natural law. They said, okay, we got to make some reparations. We got to, give property to people, settle that out. Then what we got to do is we have some vindicative justice. We got to do something with the Kaiser who started this war and other people who started this war. And then what we have to do is we have to have open diplomacy, trade, and we have to create the League of Nations. That was Wilson's 14-point plan. We got to create the League of Nations because we have to get a community here juridically to stop the fighting. okay? Because obviously everything else couldn't stop it. So the League formed and it failed because the U.S. wasn't in it. And then you had World War II, again, estimated between 69 to 83 million people killed. So, and about a quarter of a billion, another 250 million who were hurt or wounded or casualties. So what was the cause? Desire for wealth, power, land, satisfy ancient hatreds, ancient vengeances. And the leaders were autocrats, they were dictators, absolute rulers who slaughtered people, and things had to change. So the change came from two directions. It came from America, and it came from the natural law, or the law of nations, which is inherent in American DNA. All right, so let's talk about this. The most notable American who brought about this change was a guy by the name of Cordell Hull. He was the Secretary of State. He was from Tennessee. He's been called the Father of the United Nations. He got the Nobel Peace Prize for setting up the United Nations. He was Secretary of State from 1933 to 1944, longest serving Secretary of State. World War II started. He said, we got to do better. Okay. So in 1938, he gave a speech, which was very instructive because it shows the American commitment to the law of nations, to the natural law, and to its importance in ordering the world so that the person is best served. You have peace, you have development, you have human rights. So in June 1938, Hull gave a speech, and he said, in 1815, Chief Justice Marshall declared that the law of nations is a part of the law of the land. It's part of the law of America. Okay. And he said that for this purpose, there's no controlling executive or legislative act or judicial decision. When that isn't there, the resort must be had to the customs and usages of the civilized. So customs and usages of the civilized were set out by Aimé de Vattel in his Law of Nations, a treatise widely read by the American founders who took it to heart. And Vattel explained that the law of nations was a consequence of and in accordance with the law of nature. Hence, we see this reference in the Declaration of the Independence to the law of nature. He's talking about the law of nations. So Vattel wrote that the universal society of the human race, being an institution of nature itself. So this is understood by the American founders at the very beginning, carried on down to Cordell Hull, even to this day, despite the current administration. The universal society of the human race being an institution of nature itself, of herself, that is to say, a necessary consequence of the nature of man. All men, in whatever station they are placed, are bound to cultivate it and discharge its duties. They cannot liberate themselves from the obligation by any convention or any private association. So in order to achieve this nature of man, in order to cultivate it and discharge the duties, there were two general obligations. The first is the very object of society of nations, is that each individual nation is bound to contribute everything in her power to the happiness and perfection of all the others. Secondly, each nation should be left in the peaceful enjoyment of liberty that she inherits from nature, as the natural society of nations cannot subsist unless the natural rights of each be duly respected. So Hull said that the customs and usages of the civilized were to become part of the new system. So he developed this further. And we see this reflected today in the UN, in the systems, in U.S. policy, with the last few weeks being a minor blip. Okay, so domestic society must be, first of all, domestic society has to be right order. The person has got to be the focus of society. The person, not the individual, the person. So we're talking about the whole gamut here. The intellectual, the material, the spiritual. Has to be the focus of society, which is to be governed by law or friendship, also known as sociability. He said, it is only through the development of social institutions, through the evolution of man as a social being, that humanity has steadily progressed to higher and higher levels of civilized existence and has learned the true meaning of individual freedom. The foundations of such existence and of such freedom is order under law. He has to have security for life and property, material advancement resulting from organized effort and enterprise, moral, intellectual, and spiritual betterment that come about from contacts and fellowship in the community. And he has to be able to contribute to the maintenance of the organized society. He has to exercise self-restraint, and he has to be able to be willing to accept the practices of social conduct. Second of all, Cordell Hull said, and this is absolutely brilliant, because he understood that there was this argument that justified the anarchic world society where all the countries could fight each other and we could have great powers and big wars and take territory and, fight each other and see who's the strong man in the world and divide up the world, like the Europeans did. He said no. He said this is a bad idea. He said, and this is absolutely in accordance with Catholic teaching. He said that the primacy of states as the perfect society is wrong. He says, we've got states. That's right. We have states. We have countries. We have countries. But there's no doubt about that. But they are not perfect. They're perfect to a degree, but they do not stand alone. They do not control the world. They are supposed to work together because there is a community which they are part of. They don't exist anarchically all by themselves, sociopathically doing whatever they want. They're part of a community. And an essential to that was this idea that the states are not the sole arbiter of international conduct. The essence of that, if you accept that position, that is the essence of international anarchy. And so what happens in that case is armed conflict becomes the rule of relations among nations. And it crushes all life. So international law exists with the idea that we're part of a community. And this idea of a community was found in Vattel's writings, something the Americans always held and believed in. Okay, third, law is supposed to order international relations between the states. And so the process of international law is the civilized man's way of conducting relations. The primary function of international law is to define and prescribe rules of international conduct. And they have to represent the maximum practical reconciliation between the sovereign rights of each nation, the sovereign rights of other nations, and international law is a powerful force for human progress. Okay, last but not least, and this is truly powerful. He said the natural course of humanity is not war. It is peace. It is peace. America has always said peace is the natural way that we are. Now, sometimes we have to fight in self-defense or to keep the order right, to keep the right order, which, again, are ideas that go back to the law of nations, to the natural law. So he said that that is a false doctrine to say armed conflict is the natural and inevitable state of man. He says we have to have the spirit of live and let live. And he said maintenance of peace should be constantly advocated and practiced. All nations should seek to adjust their problems in their international relations by processes of peaceful negotiations and agreements. They have to uphold the sanctity of treaties and faithful observance of international agreements. Sanctity of treaties, faithful observance of international agreements. The United Nations Charter is a treaty. And if you break that treaty, you're acting illegally, you're acting immorally. Okay. All right. Each nation, he said, also should be ready to cooperate in peace and practical means in support of these principles. Okay. So this is the American Hull setting out these natural law principles. Now, John Epstein was an Englishman, and I've talked about him on this program before, but he wrote a book, The Catholic Tradition of the Law of Nations, which is a brilliant book. It was recognized by a lot of people. It got a papal medal. So anyways, he says that the law of nations, and this is what we're talking about here with Cordell Hull, the law of nations serves better than any other English term to indicate the natural and the moral basis of the rules obtaining between peoples and the positive forms given to those rules. It would be inaccurate to translate, though, jus gentium, which is St. Thomas Aquinas' term, as international law. More properly, it's the body of rights belonging to all peoples, whatever the accidents of their birth, which should be respected in their mutual relations. It includes the right to conserve themselves, to bequeath, to trade, to travel freely, speak their language, be ruled by their own domestic and religious customs, and also to have their own local authorities. He says the jus gentium is existing and it gives reason to the conventions or the treaties or the relations between states to promote the welfare of the families that compose the states, okay? To promote the welfare of the families. And this is what the UN does. And this is what America, with Cordell Hull and many others after him, promoted. Archbishop Hyginus Cardinale wrote a book. It's actually a very good book if you can get it. The Holy See and the International Order. It's hard to get. He said that not unlike the law of nations, the concept of international organizations, as we know it in our day, is largely a product of Christian civilization. The whole development of Christian social teaching is based on the axiom that there exists a natural society of nations which political leaders have the duty to organize and render effective. And that's what America did when it proposed a League of Nations and it proposed the United Nations. All right. So you have the Americans bringing the world to the Christian ideal on the international scene. That's what you have. And so the United Nations was the result. Okay, 50 countries met between April 25, June 26, 1945. There have been talks during World War II, but they met during that 2-month period, and they created the United Nations Charter, which is a treaty, as I said. There are 4 basic principles or pillars, which have been approved by the Catholic Church, Pius XII and other popes: human rights, peace, development, and the rule of law. Okay, those things are there to build community. And the purpose of these things are to develop friendly relations among nations, to achieve international cooperation in solving international economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian problems, promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to be a center for humanizing the actions of nations in attaining common goals or common acts. So, okay, so the UN is a treaty. You have to honor your obligations, your treaty obligations. That's called pacta sunt servanda. If you violate your obligations, it's immoral. Here's the preamble of the UN. It's very important. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Remember, this is after World War II. About 89, 90 million dead, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, because there had been mass genocides all over Europe, okay? Not to include China and other places. To reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person, to establish conditions. By the way, there's genocide going on right now in the occupied areas of Ukraine by Russia, okay? To establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress, and for these ends to practice tolerance and live together in peace, to maintain international peace and security. That armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. Have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. Accordingly, our respective governments and representatives assembled in the city of San Francisco, who have exhibited their full powers, found to be in good and due form, have agreed to the present charter of the United Nations, and do hereby establish an international organization to be known as the United Nations. Okay, so from the beginning, this organization is focused on the person. You can see it right there in the preamble. Demonstrated a relationship between the person, the family, the nation, the international community. Again, law of nation ideas, okay? Christian ideas. This is all tied together. The good of the person as the object of the international regime, with all of the components of human society on earth considered and ordered in accordance with reason to achieve this objective. That is the height of reason, and it checks extremes in antisocial behavior, autocracy, tyrants, war, and other evils. Pius XII and many Catholics in his day were pleased with the United Nations. So let's look at the different pillars. Pillar number 1. How am I doing on time? 23. Okay. Pillar number 1. Pledge for peace and establish norms of state conduct. Article 1. To maintain international peace and security. And that ends to take effective collective measures for prevention and removal of threats to the peace, for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations that might lead to a breach of the peace. Article 2, the organization's members, in pursuit of the purposes stated in Article 1, shall in accordance act with the following principles. All members shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. So what recent war brings to mind that all of this has been violated? Well, of course, it's the Russian illegal, immoral invasion of Ukraine. Okay, so right here we have one of the charter members, Russia, of the UN, breaking the charter and waging a war without justification, which I'm going to get to later, but fighting a war, waging a war, seeking to destroy Ukraine, do away with its territorial integrity and its political independence. Clear violation of the UN Charter, and it's made more egregious by the fact that Russia is a member of the Security Council, and it's got veto power. And it can be one of the persons who is supposed to keep the peace, like all the other members of the Security Council, the other permanent members, US, UK, France, and China. People's Republic. These entities are the permanent members that got veto power. Security Council is supposed to keep the peace. UN Charter Article 24 places vital responsibility on the Security Council to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations members. And the UN Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agrees that in carrying out its duties under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf. So the permanent members are essential to keeping the peace. UN security resolution, and that's why the Russian invasion, unjustified, illegal, was an egregious violation of the UN Charter. Egregious. The Security Council resolutions are formal expressions of the opinion or the will of the UN organs. It's an official document which is accepted by 15 members of the Security Council and adopted by a vote of the Council members. UN Security Council resolutions may concern UN activities, for example, like electing people to the International Court of Justice, which is the international court that can resolve disputes between countries and is established as part of the UN Charter, but are more often adopted as the UN Security Council work to ensure peaceful settlement of disputes. So the resolutions of the Security Council, as well as the General Assembly, serve as norms of conduct for the member states. UN Security Council is more of a compelling function or purpose to it. They're designed to advance right order, peace, and unity. And like I said, the UN Security Council resolutions may either be recommendatory or legally binding under Article 25. UN Security Council resolutions have been passed regarding Korea, global war on terror, Vietnam, Syria, Libya, a lot of other places, telling the world community what they can do, how they should do it. And on the global war terror, they pass resolutions too. And so countries then act in accordance with those resolutions to keep the peace, to keep right order in the world. And the United States has always acted that way. But that's not so with Russia. And this is really egregious. Because the United Nations Security Council was hamstrung by Russia's veto at the beginning of the Ukraine war, the UN General Assembly took over to some degree, and they passed a number of resolutions over the years from 2014 until I think the autumn here, December 2024. There's resolution 72-190, 73-263, 74-168, 76-179, 77-229, 78-221, 73-194, 74-17, 75-29, 76-70. Off the top of my head, there are also emergency session resolutions 11-1 through 5 that condemned the Russian invasion and listed its violations of international law until the Russians get out right away. Get out of Ukraine. Of course, the Russians didn't obey that because they're rogue, they're pariahs. In the event of the deadlock in the Security Council, which is what we saw with the Russian veto, there's something called Uniting for Peace. Okay, and what this is known as UN General Assembly Resolution 377. Sometimes you see it with a V after it, an A after it. But anyway, it's Uniting for Peace Initiative, UN General Assembly 377. This was used in 1950 to authorize a UN mission to Korea to fight the North Koreans and Chinese aggression. So the UN can authorize the use of force to fight. And this was one example. This is in November 1950. I believe it was China China would have. Russia would have probably issued a veto on that. And so UN troops, and the world supplied troops under the UN flag to fight the North Korean and Chinese aggression in that war. And then another instance was in November 1956, which was the Suez Canal crisis, where you had two permanent members, UK and France, who were involved in the Suez Crisis. And the UN said through the UN General Assembly that we're going to put in place a force, an expeditionary force, UNEF, to make sure that the French, British, and the Israelis withdrew from Sinai and the Suez, and we get things back to normal the way they're supposed to be. So those are two very known reasons there, very known uniting for peace examples that the UN has actually used force to bring about peacekeeping, because the purpose is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And peacekeeping operations prevent the outbreak of conflict, stabilize conflict, create an environment for parties to reach a lasting peace agreement, assist in the implementation of peace agreements, assist states and territories transition to a stable government based on democratic principles and economic development. Those are also known as peace building activities. They can include disarmament, demobilization, mine actions, electoral assistance, support for the restoration and the extension of state authority, promotion of social and economic recovery and development, and so on and so forth. In the past, there have been a total of 45 peacekeeping missions. There are currently 11 peacekeeping operations that are ongoing in the world. Okay, the next pillar is human rights. Okay, we're at 31 minutes. Okay, human rights is the next pillar. This is essential to human dignity and friendships. The human rights is perhaps the greatest check on tyranny. It is the greatest guarantor of peace. The legal scholar Samuel Pufendorf, okay, that's his name, Samuel Pufendorf. He was a student, or you could say he came after Hugo Grotius. He was in that line, that tradition of Hugo Grotius. And he saw the connection between human rights and human dignity. And he saw the need for something called sociability or friendship. Because in Europe, you had peasants and you had royalty. You had people who were born special, or so the theory went. And then you had people who just weren't. And if you were a peasant, sorry to be you. You had a rotten life. You had to walk through fields filled with crap. But the rest, lived pretty good if they were special people and they were born into the hierarchy. Well, okay, so Pufendorf was writing in 1672, and he argues that human beings have perfect natural rights. Natural rights owed to one another in virtue of a certain moral standing that we assign to each other as a constitutive part of being sociable. And so whenever we address another person directly, we're saying, well, you're allowing me to speak, he said. We implicitly treat them as an accountable, responsible being. Otherwise, why do we address them at all? The same is true as when they talk to us. In other words, according to Pufendorf, being sociable implicitly involves a reciprocal assumption of basic moral status, us of them, them of us, whenever we interact, and even if the address is one that offends the equal standing of the other. So this is precisely when dignity becomes most urgent. So Pufendorf writes, quote, there seems to him to be somewhat of dignity in the appellation of man. When you call somebody man, there's dignity in that word. So the last and the most efficacious argument to curb the arrogance of insulting men is, I am not a dog, but a man, as well as yourself. So Pufendorf saw the connection between dignity. Just by being a man, you have dignity, and that rights flow from that, and that those rights are important to ensure sociability, the ability to be friends in a society and get along with each other. The American Revolution recognized individual rights as a check on the power of government, check on the power of tyrants. This grew into, of course, human rights over time. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was talked about 1947, 1948. It was a way to find a foundation or fundamental principles of human dignity. Marianne Glendon, in her book, writes about the motivation for such a document. She says the horrors of World War II, remember, 90 million dead, 250 million wounded, caused the world, mass destruction. Once again, countries want territory, they want to conquer. They got some ideology, they got some autocrat. That's what happened in World War II and World War I. The horrors of World War II, and that's what's going on right now in Ukraine and Europe with Putin. The horrors of World War II caused the world to rethink the issue of a person. What is a person? A human, rights that are associated with stuff. The challenge would be to formulate a statement of human rights that will do more than just phrase respect for the individual as an individual, and must take into full account the individual as member of a social group of which he is a part. and sanctioned modes of life shape his behavior, and with whose fate his own is inextricably bound. So she was looking at the correct relation. Again, Eleanor Roosevelt was leading this effort. She was looking for the correct relation between the person, the family, the ethnic group, the nation, the country, and the international community again. So we're seeing the Universal Declaration of Rights bringing together this natural law idea that there's a community of nations, that the jus gentium exists for the purpose of the benefit of the families, that all these things have got to work in harmony. Okay, so this is what Eleanor Roosevelt did, according to Marianne Glendon. She went around and she went and talked to a lot of really smart people from a lot of different traditions. They were Confucian, Hindu, Muslim, European, from a number of different countries. And this group um, developed a core fundamental principles that were widely shared in countries that have not yet adopted rights instruments and in cultures that have not embraced the language of rights, but they were able to boil down these common convictions and put them in certain terms, certain philosophic principles. What you have actually is you don't have some Anglo-American idea, which is the Declaration, as Glendon writes. She says that actually it was more influenced by modern dignitarian rights tradition of continental Europe and Latin America. Okay, so more than individualistic documents of Anglo-American lineage, though there are elements of both in there, and they work together. And so the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was ultimately criticized by authoritarian governments like the USSR, and USSR would refuse to acknowledge the principles. And it wasn't until the Helsinki Accords in 1975 they acknowledged the principles, but they don't really live by it. Okay, so the document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, has several parts. Articles 3 to 11 list individual rights that are agreed or recognized in principle by a number of different countries. They are there to protect individuals from aggression, to get people to live together in peace. They're at the heart of human rights. They're protected in law. All this works together. The next portion of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Articles 12 through 17, pertain to the rights of the person in civil and political society. The right to be free of arbitrary interference with one's privacy, family, home, or correspondence, from arbitrary attacks upon one's honor and reputation, freedom of movement and right of return, the right to seek and enjoy political asylum, right to nationality, provisions on marriage and the family, and the right to own property. Articles 18 through 21 deal with more group rights. This is freedom of religion, belief in freedom of religion and belief, freedom of opinion, expression, communication, freedom of assembly and association, principal participation in government. Articles 22 through 27 exist and say that people are entitled to health, education, welfare, cultural existence, and more to improve their material life, their material existence. And Articles 28 and 29 insist on the need that there must be a rule of law and friendly relations between nations and amongst peoples for all of this to be implemented. So this is all tied together. Dignity, rule of law, it's all meant to be tied together. The UN reminds us that the Declaration of Human Rights was the first time that rights and freedoms of individuals were described in such details, and is also the first international recognition that human rights and fundamental freedoms apply to every person everywhere. So what you're seeing is you're actually seeing this idea of ius gentium coming up on the national stage, saying everybody around the world has certain basic rights, which are part of what the ius gentium consists of: to conserve yourself, to pass on your religion, to maintain yourself, and so on and so forth. Fundamental rights. Okay, so these are inalienable rights. They are the basis, the foundation, freedom, justice, and peace. And all nations, all countries are required to recognize them. The person is the focus of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and the person is the focus of the human rights pillar of the United Nations. Pope John the 23rd, Pacem in Terris, made clear that the well-being of the person is essential to right order in society. Any well-regulated and productive association of men in society demands the acceptance of one fundamental principle, that each individual man is truly a person. He is a nature that is endowed with intelligence and free will. He has rights and duties which flow as a direct consequence from his nature. These rights and duties are universal and inviolable, and therefore altogether unalienable. The United Nations expanded this with a General Assembly Resolution 60/1, also known as R2P, entitled World Summit Outcome, and it committed all the members of the UN, to include Russia and China, to actively protecting and promoting human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, because they're interlinked and mutually reinforcing. They belong to the universal and indivisible core values and principles of the United Nations, and all the members, to include Russia and China, reaffirmed respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction of any kind of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Okay, but this is not the case that you're seeing with Russia and with China in the world today. They want to throw out the idea of human rights. They want to get rid of that. They want every country to determine what they want to determine. They want to annul this very important part of security, peace, this very important pillar of the United Nations. Okay, the third pillar is development, which is satisfying the material. The UN recognizes the material needs of the person to be provided for. This is living a long and healthy life, being educated, having decent standard of living, freedom to participate in the life of one's community. The United Nations Economic and Social Council plays a big role in this. Again, we're seeing the whole person here. We're not just seeing the individual. We're seeing the whole person. We're seeing all this aspect of their life, that is important. That has to be nourished and developed. So in 1986, there was a Declaration on the Right to Development, which states that the right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, political development, in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. The whole person. Okay, this is the whole person. Now, the UN has done a heck of a lot. I mean, it's a really long list. They have gone around the world, and what they have done is they have made possible trade opportunities. They have helped with fighting polio and epidemics, and they've made a lot of resources available to a lot of poor societies, and they fought hunger also. So, but this is a very long list. I don't want to go into it. I'm at 41 minutes, so I don't want to do that. So the last pillar is the rule of law, which is reason, unity, peace, and promises. Ultimately, this is what we are talking about. We are talking about this idea of the rule of law governing our relations. And that is the way that you bring about and ensure peace. So let's see. Let's go with this. All right. The rule of law is absolutely core. It is absolutely. The UN Charter states that the UN aims to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are interconnected and cannot exist without one another in order to develop and prosper human beings in security, protection, the ability to exercise their individual rights. This cannot happen without the rule of law. The rule of law refers to persons and institutions, including the state, being accountable to laws that are consistent with international human rights norms and standards. In Ukraine, we have a fight between the rule of law and the rule of force. And Russia stands for the rule of force and devolution, and he is throwing out the rule of law, which has been long established. Also at issue is whether Pact Sunt Servanda, doing what is promised, is still a value. The war in Ukraine is about the international order. It's about a vision for humanity. Okay, so let's look at four main instances of violation of law. One, the illegal war. Putin could have had his dispute taken to the International Court of Justice. He didn't do that. Okay. He didn't do that. Article 92 would have allowed him to do that. The UN Charter, he didn't do that. Instead, what he did, we invaded February 24, 2022. And the message that was sent in came from the Russian ambassador to the United Nations and said that, quote, this is taken in accordance with Article 51. Our invasion is taken in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. Exercise the right of self-defense. Okay, well, that didn't hold up. Professor Michael Schmidt, professor of public international law at the University of Reading, the Strauss Center, distinguished scholar and visiting professor of law, University of Texas, deconstructs the Russian argument. He says there's no basis for self-defense in international law. And basically, it boils down to an analysis of the facts, but also an analysis of the law. And so the facts are that nobody was invading Russia. That's the facts. There were no plans to invade Russia. There was no imminent invasion of Russia. There weren't forces massing to go into Russian territory. So the argument of self-defense fails. You cannot claim preventative self-defense, because what preventative self-defense is about is it's about attacking an enemy so that the enemy cannot attack you in the future. It's an act of aggression, and this has been outlawed by international law for a very long time. So Putin also seemed to suggest that, well, there's a rationale here of collective self-defense because we have the Luhansk and the Donetsk People's Republics, and we're allies with them. We're supposed to protect them. Well, again, Professor Schmidt comes in and says, well, neither of them are separate states. They're not recognized in the international community. They're overwhelmingly considered part of Ukraine. You just can't consider yourself independent without some recognition by the international community. So the idea of collective self-defense also fails. And what Putin could have done is resorted to mediation or arbitration to resolve whatever issues he thought he had. So basically, these countries didn't exist. There was simply no argument, say collective self-defense existed. And so that was also the situation too with the illegal occupation of Crimea and the bogus referendum there to become part of Russia, which was not conducted properly or legally. So that's number one. You have violation of Article 51 of the UN Charter. This is a major part of the UN Charter to keep the peace. Russia has a special purpose, a particular job, to keep the peace, because on the UN Security Council, it totally ignored that, totally ignored the UN Charter, and there's a very egregious violation of international law. The second item of international law that we see is sovereignty. The sovereign equality of states is recognized by the UN Charter. Ukraine is a sovereign state. It's independent. It's not part of Russia. It was an original signatory of the UN Charter in 1945. An independent state. It is not part of Russia. And so as an independent state, and then again, it was again recognized in 1991. It's got a 1996 and a 2014 constitution, further confirming it's an independent state, a separate and distinct people from the Russians, and it is exercising its rights as a people under international law. Again, Putin and the Russians are coming in to say, we're going to wipe away sovereignty. You don't really exist. We're going to conquer you. We're going to destroy you. Complete violation of international law, of the UN Charter. Okay, so sovereign states are primary actors in the international community, okay, and the primary subject of international law. And in international relations, peace allows for states to provide for the welfare of the people, okay? When you invade another country and destroy it, you're not providing for the welfare of anybody. 800,000 Russian casualties and Ukrainian loss, property damage. And by the way, this is what Russia does everywhere they go. They do this in Georgia, Azerbaijan, everywhere else they go, they destroy and they leave it destroyed. Okay, so what you have then is you have with sovereign states the concept of legal personality. Okay, so states have certain characteristics, and Russia's trying to take that away. Okay, and so they have a certain population, they have defined territory, borders, a government, they're independent from political entities, they have degree of permanence, and they are sovereign within their primary area there, within their geography and with their people. Also, one legal scholar, Crawford, says that the concept of sovereignty is very broad. It's a collection of rights held by the state in its capacity as an entity to exercise control over territory and also to act on the international plane, representing the territory and its people. Malcolm Shaw, another great scholar, says states have three fundamental rights: independence, equality, and peaceful coexistence. The concept of independence or sovereignty includes a number of rights and duties. The right to a state to exercise jurisdiction over its territory and its permanent population, the right to engage upon an act of self-defense in certain matters, and the right to self-preservation and defense, the right to make treaties, the right to equality, the right to promote national interests. All of these things are part of sovereignty. So when people say, well, Ukraine should not be allowed to be part of NATO, they're taking away the sovereignty of Ukraine, because Ukraine wants to protect itself from Russia. And they have always wanted to protect themselves from Russia. And that's what the Euromaidan movement was about in 2013, to get away from Russia, because they're afraid of Russia, and for good cause, because Russia invaded them. And the UN and killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of property. And the UN Charter and the international law exists to make sure states keep that sovereignty and have that choice to go west instead of going east. And that is what some people are trying to take away right now from Ukraine and other countries. Okay. Now, Emmerich de Victal also wrote, who wrote the Law of Nations and the American Founding Fathers read and believed in. He understood that the duties of every country were to provide for the necessities of the nation, to procure the true happiness of the nation, and to fortify the nation against external attacks. So again, international law is tracking with the American experience, the American belief. So Putin's assault is to do away with Ukraine, to create an empire. This is devolution. He wants to strip Ukraine the ability to defend itself and take its land. This is devolution. Further devolution is the next major violation of international law, is genocide. Genocide is against the Rome Statute. Genocide is what the Nazis did and the Japanese did and other people did during World War II. They destroyed whole peoples because of their ethnicity, because of who they were. Okay, this is outlawed now under international law, but Putin and Xi and the CCP want to do away with that. They don't care about genocide, and it appears right now that Trump doesn't care about it either. Okay, so genocide is an attack against human rights and the person, an attack against the dignity of the person. Law is supposed to protect the person. That's why we have the Rome Statute. Genocide and cultural genocide have been alleged against the Russians. There's quite a lot of evidence about that. Vladimir Putin has got an arrest warrant out for him from the International Criminal Court. Arrest warrants were also issued against Maria Belova in March for war crimes, unlawful deportation, and transfer of Ukrainian children during the Russo-Ukrainian War. Other warrants issued in June of 2024 against Viktor Sokolov, Sergei Kobyach, and Sergei Shoigu for crimes against humanity. Oh, and Valery Gerasimov, don't forget him. This was for crimes against humanity and other offenses. The ICC has arrest warrants out for them. They're supposed to be apprehended and brought to The Hague for trial. By the way, Duterte of the Philippines, who waged allegedly illegal, immoral war, is now being shipped over to the ICC because there's a warrant for his arrest. He was the prior president or ruler of the Philippines. Okay, there are other international cases that are pending in front of the International Court of Justice brought by Ukraine against Russia. The Helsinki Commission, or the Commission on Security and Cooperation of Europe, detailed the genocide being done by Russia against the Ukrainians. The UN High Commission for Refugees reports on the situation, saying 3.7 million are displaced, and these numbers are probably low, while 6.8 million are displaced as refugees abroad. 12.7 million are in need of multi-sectoral humanitarian assistance, and of course, hundreds of thousands are dead. The last major violation of international law is taking land by force. And this comes out and when we talk about peace terms. Okay, it is against international law to take land by force. International law does not recognize changing borders when you run your army in and seize it. That's what the Nazis did, and that's what Japan did, and Italy did, and Russia's doing. Okay, you can't do that. That is against international law. And so this is important because we talk about peace treaties, and Zelensky and the EU in 2014, summer 2014, came out with terms of peace treaty that were perfectly in accordance with international law, perfectly in accordance with the UN General Assembly resolutions to tell Russia to get out and to set out the terms for peace. And the term for that peace is for Russia to vacate, to get out of Ukraine, to pay reparations, don't come back in, and more. Okay, there's more. But it is that Ukraine keeps its territory. All right. And there were about 10 different items. You can find them if you look up Zelensky's peace plan. It's absolutely a good peace plan. Those are four major violations of international law we're seeing. We're seeing violation of these laws has led to enormous amount of suffering. And it is because Putin and Russia is the aggressor. They are the wrongdoer. They are immoral. They're the bad guys. And they're causing this with the violation of international law, and they're destroying a lot of persons. So, as I said earlier, Alexander Dugin is Putin's brain, and he wrote in the Arctos Journal, February 8th, he says, they lay out this whole idea of what Putin and devolution is about, which is that you have great powers that must act on the global stage as a full-fledged subject concerned only with achieving its own goals and defending its own values and interests. Trump's ideology rejects any hints of internationalism or rhetoric about universal human values, world democracy, human rights, and the like. All of these things we don't want is what Russia's about. But America has always stood for human rights, human values, the rule of law, development, and the 4 pillars of the UN. Peace. That is what we have always stood for. We've always acted in accordance with the United Nations resolutions, General Assembly or Security Council resolutions, or in accordance with the right principles and with right law in our actions. So I think now, as I conclude, and I'm not sure if there's going to be any questions. We're at about 55.5 minutes. Let us remember the words of Secretary of State Cordell Hull from 1940 as the war was raging in Europe. He said, the United States, together with most other nations, has stood firmly for the basic principles underlying civilized international relations: peace, law, justice, treaty observance, non-intervention, peaceful settlement of differences, and fair dealing, supported by the fullest practical measure of international cooperation. And I'm saying we still do. Okay, we still do, and we always will. By deed and utterance, the would-be conquerors, Hull went on to say, have made it abundantly clear that they are engaged upon a relentless attempt to transform the civilized world as we have known it into a world in which all mankind will be reduced again to the degradation of a master and a slave relationship among nations and among individuals maintained by brute force. End of quote. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what humans fight against, what Christians fight against. That is why we are for the rule of law, for the 4 pillars of the United Nations. And that is why this war is a war for humanity. We are fighting for each other against tyranny and evil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. That was very insightful and very comprehensive with the background you gave us from some of those legal texts and so forth. And if Eric has any questions, feel free to chime in here. Something that I had, David, was, of course, it slips my mind at this moment. Yes, the topic, of course, this wasn't the topic of your talk just now, but it's appropriate. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, it seems there's a similar violation of UN injunctions and so forth. Are there any, besides Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Palestine, are there any other, if you agree with that second point, of the point that I'm making about Palestine, are there any other events going on in the world that you would see as being equally as flagrant, at least as Ukraine and Russia, and if I'm correct, Palestine and Israel, as to the UN's vision?
Well, I think that you're seeing in China a very real suppression of peoples. You're seeing a violation of human rights in China, I believe. And that's with the Uyghurs. And that's why you saw the Chinese talk so vociferously at the United Nations against this idea of human rights. And they don't like this idea of being able to go into a country and help people. And you know, Vattel saw the importance of being able to assist the people who are being oppressed by a tyrant, if that people ask for the help. And even Catholic doctrine and Catholic teaching says, you know, if you oppress people, you can go in to stop that oppression. I mean, that was the whole idea of Hernando Cortez, you know, and stopping the Mayan and the Aztec, you know, slaughter of conquered peoples. I mean, they went in there to stop that. You know, part of the reason there were alliances and other reasons too, but that was part of the reason where you could go in and stop the tyrant from destroying his people. So this idea of intervention, which includes, you know, going into another country to stop what a tyrant's doing, has been out there. as long as it's in accordance with law and right principle.
Great, thank you for that. And then, another thing I could throw your way and see your mind on the matter is, I mean, it's fair to say that in this presentation, you're obviously pro United Nations.
Yes, I think the United Nations is fundamentally a good organization. It's based on good principles. All the countries have a say in there, and they can shape this and form this to help the community. People are working together to help the community of nations by the various initiatives, whether it's health or to reduce famine or whatever, rights or whatever. And there, a lot of people don't understand there's a whole lot of resolutions that deal with trying to maintain right order and peace within and between countries.
And I see Eric has a few questions. Before I put a sock in it here, just building off of that, David, what would you say to people, including not a few Catholics, who are very hesitant, if not critical, about the United Nations, or what they perceive as certain agendas about the United Nations, whether that's
Well,
population control?
well. First of all, a lot of people are getting bad information. So they're listening to sensationalists. They're listening to disinformation, and you can't really talk about this stuff unless you break down where they're getting their information and what they're being told. I mean, I will tell you that the strategic development goals are all signed up by every country in the world has bought into all 17 of them. But once again, we need to get down into details and look at what's actually happening and what actually the complaint is. Because what you're seeing is a very real movement, to do away with this formal structure of the community of nations. Instead of doing away with it, let's make it better. That's why you got the Holy See, and that's why you got a lot of other people involved to make it better. Don't fix it.
Great, thank you, David. And Eric, please feel free to shoot away there at David here. Thank you so much for your input.
Yeah, greetings everyone here, gentlemen, well, the two and whoever's listening. Thank you very much for bringing up Vital, by the way. It's surprising to hear, well, you're clearly advanced within international law, which is something that I focus on. And no, I'm not I don't have a law degree, but I've studied law for 20 plus years, if not more. Consummate student. If you might, when it comes to specifically like U.S. law, and I guess I want to focus on estate and trust law, and especially going back to, well, we have two things. We have the Seste KV Act, which originated in the UK, and a lot of people are unfamiliar. There was something that predated that, which would be ecclesiastical law based in estates of the realm, which I think originated in France, not the UK, like the Seste KV Act. Did that make sense? I know it's kind of
it doesn't make any sense. I don't know what you're talking about. Ecclesiastical law is law in the church, as I understand it. You're talking about estates of the, I don't know what that is. Is that something from France?
The estates of the realm was from the Middle Ages and predated this. Are you familiar with the Seste KV Act?
No, I don't know what that's about. No.
No. Okay.
I don't even know what you're saying. What is it you're saying? Well, can you speak slowly so I can hear it?
The Seste KV Act is basically
the Seste V. Is that French?
Yes, SCESTUI VIE, like life.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
It was 1666. Seste KV Act 1666. Are you versed or studied in estate and trust law?
I don't practice estate and trust, but I know Indiana estates and trusts to a degree, but I can't render any opinion. There are certain principles, that apply. But
how about the doctrine of the parens patriae doctrine?
The what?
The parens patriae.
The parents detective.
Parens patriae. Patriens, parents patriae, father of the how to translate that into English. Father of
Okay,
the
so you're speaking a different language. This is not English, right?
well, it's a doctrine. You'll find it in Cornell law, Black's law, Bouvier's law.
Well, then I
I
defer to
don't know the
them.
English term.
Yeah,
Here, I
then
can.
I defer to them, whatever they say.
Okay, no, I mean I just
I mean, what does this have to do with the UN?
well, a lot of my focus is on the 14th Amendment, whether it was ratified or not, constitutionally, administrative law. Um, we it's interesting. We've kind of heard the Trump administration platform start veering into what we hear the administrative state, and that leads us into administrative law. We just had was it last year, the Chevron deference was overturned by the Supreme Court, and Justice Gorsuch has had quite a few interesting comments about administrative law. Do you have any insights onto that administrative law?
Read the decision.
Yeah, I wrote probably a 30-page analysis on it. All right, no, I mean but thank you very much for the law, bringing up the law of nations. I suggest, I mean, whether you're big on, I think it should be required reading in high school at least, or middle school. But unfortunately, we don't have that in this country anymore. Nobody just studies the law, the Constitution, the amendments, the Bill of Rights. They
No,
don't teach
people
it.
do. That's not true. People do study it. People do study it, and they do read it.
No, I mean
That's not true.
in the public schools.
There are civic programs in the state of Indiana, maybe in other states there are civic programs, but they allow people to learn the basics, and they are set for all people of all different ages.
Okay. All right. All right. I appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Thanks for the time.
Great. Thanks, Eric, for that. And I think the little bit I know about the French thing that Eric was bringing up, and maybe that's where he was going, is that, say, QV or however it's pronounced, had something to do with monasteries and the relationship to the French state. But
I don't know anything about that. I know nothing about that. It's ecclesiastical law, and I don't know ecclesiastical law.
It's basically the Seste Key was admiralty law, estate and trust law, missing persons, lost at sea, that kind of thing. And it kind of ties into the Social Security Administration trust that we all get attached to. That's just, I guess, the modern incarnation of this age-old separating of the estate management. All right, yeah. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, good man, Eric. Thank you so much. And thank you, David. Thank you for that. And for the people watching this after the recording, David, what is your book title and your blog as well?
Take a look at the American Proposition. And we keep that up to date with different things that are happening. And then you can find out more about what I'm writing there.
Great, great. So for people watching us live, I'm going to take about a 15-minute break. Then I'll come back and give my presentation at the top of the hour on the present destruction, I think, of Syria and what's going on there, quite literally as we speak, the massacres that are happening. And after that, Thaddeus Kaczynski will speak about authority from a Catholic perspective. And Thaddeus is a blogger and author himself. So that's coming up at 7 o'clock Eastern. Then at 7:45, we have Compline in our other room, so to speak. And everyone's welcome to join us for that from the old breviary. And then at 8 o'clock, we have an open plenary session on the advice of David, and I'm very happy he had suggested this, for anyone at all. Same link as this, and we'll talk about, I don't know, we'll see how the Spirit moves us. But to the audience, thank you for your attention. And David, thank you very much for your patience and for joining us and speaking. And I have sent you since the YouTube link that you were asking for as well. And I will send you this file. I won't lose it this time, David, I promise.
Okay. Thank you, John. You're very kind. I appreciate it.
Very good. We'll be in touch soon now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.